All right, this is 5.3 on rational numbers. And so rational numbers is just a fancy word for fractions, okay? And so we've got two pieces of our fraction. We've got our numerator, which is our top number, and our denominator, which is our bottom number, okay? And so the top number is being divided by the bottom number. So the first thing that we need to do is recall how to write a fraction in what we call lowest terms or simplest terms. But the definition or the set of rational numbers is denoted by the letter Q, and it is all set of numbers in the form where we can have P divided by Q as long as Q does not equal 0. Since we learned in the last section we cannot divide by 0, so we should never have a 0 in that denominator. So what we're doing is that we are simply reducing or taking out what we call factors of 1. And so most of you probably learned how to do this by finding a number that will divide evenly into both the top and the bottom numbers until you can't divide either one by anything else. So these two numbers are both divisible by 3. And so 6 divided by 3 leaves me 2, and 9 divided by 3 leaves me 3. And so that is my simplest form of the fraction. Anything that ends in a 0 or a 5 is divisible by 5. So when I divide both of these top and bottom by 5, I get 4 over 5. Now, sometimes the numbers may be a little bit more difficult to recognize factors. One thing I always tell students is if they look at a number and they're both even, then you know you can divide them by 2. But in this case where I have 28 and 63, hopefully you know that both of those are factors of 7. And 28 is divided by 7 leaves me 4. And 63 divided by 7 leaves me 9, okay? So in this case, when I'm asking you for simplified fractions, I don't want decimals. There will be a time where we will convert fractions to decimals. And in this case, you may not recognize a number bigger than 2 can divide into these. So I'm going to start by dividing both the top and the bottom by 2. And so 36 divided by 2 gives me 18. And 56 divided by 2 gives me 28. And so those are also even. So I'm going to divide again by 2. And so that gives me 9/14. And then that would be my simplified answer, okay? So next, we are converting a positive mixed number into an improper fraction. And then we're going to talk about how we do that with a negative. So I always write this little example here, is that when we have a mixed number, we have a whole number, and we have a numerator, and then we have a denominator. So to convert that to an improper fraction, which an improper fraction is what I call a top-heavy fraction, where the number on top is bigger than the number on the bottom. So you are going to take the whole number times the denominator plus the numerator and always write it over the denominator. So the good thing is the denominator never changes. The denominator, the number in the bottom of the fraction, is always the number in the bottom of the fraction. So when I look at this, the positive numbers work exactly like this. So I like to do this where I multiply and then I add. So 2 times 5 is 10 plus 3 gives me 13. And that's all over 5. So 13/5 is the same as 2 3/5. Okay, we do the next one. 4 times 8 is 32, plus 7 is 39, and that's all over 8. Now, where we have to be careful is when there is a negative number in the front of the whole number, okay? So what you have to realize is that this actually means that the 5 is negative as well as the fraction, okay? So if you can think about it, because this is how we put -5 and -3/4 together by adding the same sign, okay? But what happens is that students take -5 times 4, and they get, and I'm going to put this in red so that you make a note that this is wrong, okay? They take -5 times 4, and then add 3, and so they get -20 plus 3, which is -17, and then they put it over 4. And that, my friends, is a no-no, okay? So what I tell students to do is think of it this way. You're going to leave the negative sign out in front, and then you're going to take 5 times 4 plus 3, and then put that over 4. So 5 times 4 is 20, and 20 plus 3 is 23. Now I make it negative, okay? So that's the only difference when we have the positive and negatives, that you have to recognize that the whole number is negative as well as the fraction. So you've got to make sure that you just leave that negative sign out in front and then take care of the calculation. So I write the negative sign, 7 times 5 plus 1, and that's all going to be over 5. So 7 times 5 is 35, plus 1 is 36. Now I put the negative sign and make that -36/5, okay? Now we're going to reverse the process, okay? We're going to go from an improper number to a mixed number. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the divisor or the denominator, and we're going to divide it into the numerator. And we're going to get a quotient, which sits on top, and then we're going to do that subtraction, and we're going to have a remainder, okay? So when we write our mixed number, we have the quotient is the whole number. We have the remainder is our new numerator, and it's always over the same denominator. Okay, so we're going to have to go old school. Now, if you do this on a calculator, you're going to get a decimal, and I'm not going to want a decimal for this. I'm going to want a whole number and a fraction. So as we do this, we're going to take 5 and divide it into 8, and 5 goes into 8 one time. 1 times 5 is 5, and we subtract, and we get 3. So as a mixed number, 1 is my whole number, 3 is my remainder, all over my denominator. And the good thing is that you can check this, okay? So we can take 1 times 5 plus 3, and that gives me 8/5. And that's what I started with, okay? So now we're going to try this one. You're going to take 4 and go into 13. And so 4 divides into 13 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12. Subtract, remainder of 1. So remember, this is my whole number. My remainder goes on top, and my denominator is always the same. These numbers are always the same, the denominator, okay? Now, just like the negative problems that we did on the other one, we're going to leave the negative sign until the end. But we have one more positive one. So we're going to take this, and we're going to take 8 and divide it into 39. And so 8 goes into 39 4 times. 4 times 8 is 32. Subtract, and I get a 7. So remember, your remainder must always be less than your divisor. If not, then it means you can go into it further. So this would come out to be 4 7/8. Okay? Now, this last one, I'm going to take 6 and divide it into 61, and then I'm going to leave my negative sign until the end. So when I take 6 goes into 6, that's 1 time. And 1 times 6 is 6. Subtract, bring down the 1. 6 goes into 1 0 times, and I take 0 times 6, which is 0, and I'm left with a remainder of 1. So now I put the negative sign back in front, 10 and 1, 6. Okay? All right. Now we're going to talk about reading a ruler. And so some of the problems that they are asking you to do in your homework is asking you to write the indicated improper fraction. And so what you have to determine is, how is this ruler being divided? So what I tell everybody is, I tell students to count the number of tick marks or little slashes it takes you to get to that first number. So if I start here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that means that this ruler is divided into 8s, which will be the denominator, okay? So now that's pointing to this arrow right here. So I'm going to count how many spaces it takes to get to that arrow. So I've already got 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that ruler is 21 eighths, okay? So again, this next one, you look and let's see how this ruler is divided. And so I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So again, it's divided into eighths. And so if I do that, so there's 8 there. 2 times 8 is 16. 3 times 8 is 24. 4 times 8 is 32. 5 times 8 is 40. 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46. So that would be 46 eighths. And I believe you have some in your homework like that to see how many tick marks you can count to get to that arrow, okay? Now, the next part, we can use a calculator, and these are what are called terminating, which means they end, or we'll have repeating decimals, okay? So when we are looking at terminating decimals, we take the top number and divide it by the bottom number on our calculator. And so when I take 4 and divide it by 5, I'm going to get 0.8. And so I just want to make sure, let's get my calculator up here. But yeah, it does. So clear, 4 divided by 5 does give me 0.8, okay? Now, when I do a negative number, I like to put it with my top number and divide it by the bottom number. Only one of those numbers is negative when I have a negative sign in front. So 21 divided by, or negative 21 divided by negative 21 divided by 25 is going to be negative 0.84. Okay, now in this last example, we have a top-heavy fraction, which means that I'm going to have a number in front of the decimal point. So when I take 97 and divide it by 40, I will get 2.425. Now, unless they ask you to round it, you are just to put all of the decimal points there, okay? We'll talk about rounding because that does come up to be an issue for some students, and we'll talk about that when we get a little further into this section. Now we're going to talk about repeating decimals. And so what these problems look like, I'm going to show you how to do them on a calculator. But repeating decimals, you use a bar over the numbers that repeat, okay? So if I take 2 and divide it by 3, I'm going to see 0.6666, and it's going to go on. But on your calculator screen, it only can hold so much. So they're going to give you a multiple choice. And actually on your calculator screen, you may have something that looks like this. They'll take that last 6 and round it. But it'll be a multiple choice, and the correct answer will be 0.6 with a bar over it, okay? Usually if you have a multiple of 3 in the denominator, that's an indicator that the decimal is going to repeat. If you take 14 and divide it by 99, you are going to get 0.141414, etc. And so your correct answer is going to have the bar over the entire 14. Now, when we have a mixed number, remember that this number right here is going to go in front of the decimal point, and all you have to worry about is this portion right here. So you're going to take 5 and divide it by 36. And when I do that, I'm going to get 0.13, and then I have a bunch of 8s, and the 8 is the only number that has a repeater on it, okay? So that's going to be important, just to put the line over top of the correct number that's repeating. Now, this is what it's going to look in my math lab. You've got 35 divided by 6, and so when I take 35 and divide it by 6, I'm going to get 5.833333, etc. And so you have a lot of choices that look exactly the same. A lot of you might choose A because that's what it says on your calculator. Some of you will round to B. Some of you will incorrectly put the repeater bar over the 8 as well, but the correct answer is D because only the 3 is repeating, but the 5 and the 8 are part of your answer. Now that I don't really like how my math lab does that, because I think it's unfair to put A as part of your answer, because that's what you're seeing on your calculator. But they want you to recognize that if you see all those 3s, that means that it's going to go on forever, okay? Now we have to convert decimals to fractions, and when we convert decimals to fractions, you need to know your place values, okay? So I think of tenths. 10 has 1 0, so tenths is one decimal place after the decimal point. Hundredths, 100 has 2 zeros, so that means it's 2 decimal places after the decimal point. Thousands, etc. So when you're converting decimals to fractions, you will look at this number, you will drop the decimal point, write the number that you see in the numerator, and then create the denominator by counting how many places after the decimal point. And so since there's 1 place after the decimal point, that means that there will be 1 0 after the 1 in the denominator. And then you look and see, can I simplify that? And 7/10 does not simplify, so that would be my correct answer, okay? The next one, you take 35, write that in the numerator. You've got 2 numbers after the decimal point, so you will have 2 zeros that follow the 1. And then both of these are divisible by 5. So that gives me 7/20. Okay. Now in the next one, you've got the number 16. I don't have to write the 0 in the numerator, but I do have to count 1. Whoops, sorry. Got my pen stuck. Count 1, 2, 3. So that would be 3 zeros in the bottom. So 16 1/1000ths. Now both of those numbers are even, so I can divide by 2. And so that gives me 8/500ths. Both of those are even. So I can divide by 2 again. So that gives me 4/250s. And both of those are even. So I can divide by 2 one more time. And so 2/125ths is going to be my answer. And you can check this because if you take 2 divided by 125, you should get 0.0116. And so I'm going to just check it out. 2 divided by 125, I do get 0.0116. Okay. Now in this last one, again, if there is a number in front of the decimal point, that means there is a number in front of the fraction. And so all you have to worry about is put 41 in the numerator. There are 2 decimal places after the decimal point. So that means that there's 2 zeros. And so I wouldn't change it to an improper fraction. Into an improper fraction unless they specifically ask me. I would just leave it as 3 and 41/100ths. Now, the tricky part, okay? Repeating decimals to fractions. So I'm going to show you the math behind it, and then I'm going to show you the shortcut, okay? So the math behind it looks like this. I'm going to let n equal 0.333, etc. And I'm just going to write it out a little bit and put those dots behind it so that it tells me it continues on. Then I'm going to take that and I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. And when I multiply both sides by 10, that gives me this. Okay, it moves the decimal one place to the left. Then I'm going to subtract the original number. And so when I subtract the original number, what happens is that the repeating part goes away. And so now I have 10 n's minus 1 n, which is 9n, and that equals 3. Then I must solve for n. And so n is 3/9, which I can simplify to 1/3. So if you checked on your calculator 1 divided by 3, you would get 0.3333 repeating, okay? So here's the shortcut, okay? And this is only for repeating decimals, okay? For repeating decimals. Write the number with the bar in the numerator without the bar, okay? So I put 3 in the numerator. Then I say that 3 has 1 decimal place, 0.3 had 1 decimal place after the decimal point. So I'm going to take 10, and that repeater bar tells me that I have to subtract 1. And so then I would get 3/9, which then would simplify to 1/3. Okay, so using the shortcut, we're going to try this one and we're going to do a few more. Okay, so I'm going to take 0.35. I'm going to write 35 in the numerator. There's 2 numbers that repeat. So I take 100, the repeater bar, and always subtract 1. You will always subtract 1 no matter what. And so now I get 35/99. And then you can check it on your calculator. 35 divided by 99 is going to give you 0.353535, etc. Okay, and that's as far as we can take it. So now we'll try this one, 0.8, okay? So we write 8. We take 10, because there's one place after the decimal point, we use the repeater bar and we subtract 1. So that becomes 8/9. Now, there is one that comes up, and it comes up quite a bit in the homework, and it's just because it's a reiteration of, different numbers. So I'm going to put a little star right here just so that you're aware of this. This one is 0.9 repeating. And so if I follow the shortcut, it says take 9 and take 10 repeater bar minus 1. And that gives me 9/9, which then simplifies to 1. And that's kind of misleading because 0.9 with the bar over it technically is not 1, but it's pretty darn close to 1. 0.9999999, etc., is as close to 1 as you can get without being 1. And so that one, if you happen to get that one in your homework, and you do it, it looks a little bit confusing. So I just wanted to point it out that it's out there. And so, you can kind of approach it this way if you do get that problem in your homework. Now, we're going to do one more. And this one is going to be a mixed number. And the only reason it's going to be a mixed number is because we have that 1 in front. So I'm going to write 1. I'm going to take 36, that's the fraction part. I'm going to take 100 minus 1. And so now I have 1 and 36/99. And that can be simplified by dividing by 3 and 3. So now I have 1 and 12/33s. Okay, and that would be it. So I'm going to stop there before we get to the operations, and that should get you a good start on 5.3.